In 1823, mathematician Charles Babbage invented the first working computer called the difference machine. It was a mechanical machine, not an electronic one, as we're used to today. Babbage also intensely hated organ grinders and their monkeys, but that's another story. Exactly 100 years later, in 1923, Kodak invented 16mm film, which was meant to be more accessible and cheaper to the masses than the current 35mm film that most films were produced on in those days. From these humble beginnings, millions of feature films, short films, documentaries, news reports and other programs were made over the next century. To celebrate the bicentenary of the computer and the centenary of 16mm film, I decided that I would use this original Kodak Model A camera to make a short film, produced with exactly the same techniques that they used in 1923. It had to be in black and white and in synchronous sound, as sync sound and colour had not yet been invented in 1923. I thought this was going to be the start of a really big adventure. I soon came to realise how terribly wrong I was. The camera itself is quite a rudimentary device. It's basically a box that's light-proof and able to load film into it. On the side is the hand crank that runs the film through the gate. Now, this camera is supposed to run at 16 frames per second. Nowadays, of course, we run 24, 25 frames per second. How do I know it's running 16 frames per second? Well, I don't. It has a little description on the side of the camera here that says, turn crank 2 revolutions per second equals 16 frames. Can it be too slow revolutions? Too fast? I guess you just go an average speed and hope for the best. So, no motor with this camera. It had to be hand cranked. The lens itself is hidden behind this little metal cover. You flick it up and there's the lens there. It's a fixed 25mm lens, which means it makes it very, very difficult to do close-ups. Well, virtually impossible to do close-ups. Mid-shots become very difficult. Mostly you're left with wide shots because of the length of the lens. Another issue is the lens technology of the time. As you can see, that's a 25mm lens 100 years ago. This is a 25mm lens today. As you can see, it's a very different and more advanced technology that we have today than we did back then, and as a result, these create a much sharper and clearer image than a lens like this will in a camera. Next to it is the viewfinder, which travels all the way back to the rear of the camera here that you're then able to look through. The only problem being, this isn't a reflex viewfinder, so the images are upside down and back to front when you look through them. Also, you can't adjust the viewfinder. It's stuck there, so you're always having to do this to be able to get your frame. Which is okay if you're on a tripod, but if you're trying to do something a little bit more tricky, it makes it very difficult. Also, because the viewfinder is upside down and back to front, framing the image becomes very hard, especially if you've got actors who are moving within the scene, because if they move, say, stage left, what you're seeing is the actor moving stage right. The problem with this viewfinder, combined with the hand crank, makes it really difficult to do pans or tilts. Because if you've got an actor who's moving stage left, you're seeing through the camera them moving stage right. So it's counterintuitive to your movement of the camera. If they go left, you'll see them going right, and you'll want to instinctively move the camera to the right. Then with the hand crank, it makes it difficult to pan or tilt, because once you start to do that, your hand becomes uneven. It gets pulled to the left or to the right, and you lose momentum in the hand crank. So, as you'll see in the film, I think I ended up successfully being able to do one pan because every other one just didn't work. I'd either drop the frame, I'd drop below 16 frames per second, or I'd lose the character as they moved around in the viewfinder. I also discovered something very interesting though that I'd always wondered about. And that was when in classes I used to show old black and white films from this time, I would always notice that the image would jump. I thought this was part of a problem with the projection of the film, or maybe being shot at 16 frames per second. What I soon realised that when you hand crank a camera, the torque in your arm goes into the camera and the camera itself bounces up and down. Even when I tried to do things like put my foot on the spreader and place my hand on top of the camera to provide weight, it would still create movement in the camera itself, a bouncing motion. On the rear of the camera, there are two dials. The first is your focus, which is in feet and meters, which I think is quite advanced for 1923 to have both. And the minimum focal range on this camera, on this lens, is 4.5 feet. So I couldn't actually get in closer to 4.5 feet. Otherwise, things would go out of focus. So that meant no close-ups, no extreme close-ups, and very few medium shots. The other dial on the back of the camera is the f-stop. And it ranges from f16 all the way to f3.5, which is the lowest f-stop, which means it's a very slow lens. You need a lot of light coming in to your scene to be able to film this to get perfect exposure. Putting film in the camera was simple. You just head down to the side door of the camera. And the mechanics, as you can see, are quite rudimentary. If I wind the crank, it's just a take-up spool at the bottom, pushes the camera through the gate. So I was able to load the camera quite simply, however, except for one significant problem. I had to do it in complete darkness. This film is very sensitive to light and I couldn't load it in a darkened room. I had to be in a completely black room to be able to take it out. So everything had to be done through touch. I had to be able to open the gate, open the spools, thread the film through. The first couple of times, yeah, I made some mistakes. It didn't work properly. I didn't get it on the registration pins. The film snapped, issues like that. But eventually I got used to it. By about the 20th roll, I was a complete master at getting the film threaded in a completely dark room. But it was a technique that I hadn't used in many years and young filmmakers don't know about because they just don't have to do things this complicated with cameras. The biggest problem I had, of course, was with this. The actual film stock itself. Kodak doesn't make double perforated film anymore. They only make single perf 16mm film. So trying to track this down to be able to load into this camera proved very difficult. Of course, the first mistake I did was order 16mm film with a single perforation in it. If I ran that film through this camera, the registration pins in the camera would tear the film. After that expensive mistake, I realised I had to track down double perf film, which I found in only one place in the world that makes it, a factory in New Jersey. I ordered it, it took 2 months to come. So I was sitting around twiddling my thumbs for 2 months, waiting for my film stock to turn up to be able to shoot my film. Once I had it though, I know I was able to move on to the actual shooting stage of the film. get in behind here to be able to see the viewfinder frame it up. But of course, the image is also upside down back and front, so... Yeah, so you're just going to be sitting there and looking at Deb, who's down the other end of the table from you.
But I'm not there.
But you're not there in really. It's acting!
Enough? Yeah.
After the first week, I got my rushes back and looked at them and was bitterly disappointed. Pretty much 70-80% of the shots were out of focus. There was something wrong with the camera. I don't know if it was in the lens or if it was in the gate, but I knew that I couldn't move ahead using that same camera. So I went and purchased this one from an auction house in New York. I changed cameras, I shot a second time for another second week. I sent that off, got it developed, it came back. Fortunately, this time around, 80-90% of it was in focus. Lighting for black and white was also a new experience. I wanted the film to start off with an ambient lighting look, a general normal sort of look about it every day. And then I wanted the film to get more dark and sinister as it progressed. And I wanted the darkness to come further and closer onto my actress, almost in a claustrophobic sort of way. Shooting with the viewfinder was a massive problem because of the upside down back to front image that I could see through it. This made it a nightmare in trying to work out my framing and also to direct my actor as far as their movement stage left and stage right. The few shots I did off the tripod that were done on the ground were very, very difficult because I couldn't see through the viewfinder well enough to be able to position my actor. Many times I had to guess that the camera was aligned to what was happening in front of it and that I was getting the correct shot. But often I just had to go for it. Eventually, I got used to all of these situations and filming went much smoother. However, when I got the film back, I did realise that there were a number of shots that didn't align well as far as continuity was concerned. And that was primarily because of the difficulty I had in framing through the viewfinder. But in the end, I got a film out of it that I was 90% happy with. Most of the shots were correctly exposed, I had an image, they were in focus for the most part. And I learnt a lot of the old techniques that filmmakers had used 100 years ago to produce films exactly like this. The last thing I needed to consider in all of this was, of course, the music. In 1923, there was no synchronous sound or synchronous music on film. Orchestras and organs played in cinemas around the world, accompanying whatever film was being shown. I knew that the big cinema palaces that had been built in the 1920s all had organs in them, but most of those had been closed or demolished years ago. I was able to trace down one. The Regent Cinema in Queen Street in Brisbane had a massive organ in it, and it had been taken out when the cinema had been demolished years ago. It ended up at the Gallery of Modern Art out at South Bank in Brisbane, but I still had to find somebody who would be able to play it. Fortunately, I was put into contact with the president of the Cinema Organ Society of Australia, David Bailey. He had played on this organ many times for the gallery and knew it well. So David composed the music for the Troxler Effect, and we went in there and played it on the old Regent Cinema organ. Crazy.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's big, isn't it?
It is. It's got such a sound to it. It's so unique.
Big, round sound.
So probably by now you're asking yourself, well, what is the Troxler Effect? Why the title of the film? In 1804, Ignaz Troxler undertook an experiment in optical illusion. He discovered that if you sit in a darkened room and stare at yourself in a mirror for a while, your eyes will rest on either your eyes or your nose or some part of your face that will then be in focus. The rest of your face will become out of focus. The neurons in your brain will try and compensate for this, and they will draw upon memory to try and fill in the out of focus areas with in focus material. However, the brain can't reproduce this image exactly as it is drawing on memory, and memory is faulty. Memory isn't an exact copy of reality. It is just drawing upon what it remembers your face to look like. As a result, what you see is your face becoming distorted, even demonic. I wanted to replicate this process through filmmaking and make this the theme of my film. The story of the film is a dark-haired woman accidentally cuts herself, and the blood on the knife mixes with the image she sees of herself on the knife. Suddenly a mysterious mirrored box appears, like the mirror you look at to produce the Troxler Effect. Every time she goes to grab the box, it's always just out of reach. Then suddenly a group of doppelgangers of different dark-haired women appear, more and more menacingly. Each of these women have had their faces manipulated through an artificial intelligence program. The main character then eventually is able to grab the mirrored box, and her face becomes AI'd as well, and she is transported to the artificial intelligence realm, the Troxler realm, which is filmed on a 2023 smartphone. Now we have the link between the invention of the computer in 1823, the invention of 16mm film in 1923, and the merging of these two technologies into the smartphone of 2023. Why the use of an AI program? Well, an AI program is not sentient. It does not know what a human face looks like or is supposed to look like. It uses algorithms to approximate what a face should look like based on binary databases. As a result, it doesn't quite get faces right. Like human memory, these algorithms can't reproduce the face exactly as it really doesn't know what a face looks like. As a result, it distorts the face just like the Troxler Effect does. My argument is that artificial intelligence as applied to filmmaking in the 21st century is the Troxler Effect. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this film, which has been 200 years in the making.